Hi, my name is Michele Pagliuso, and I am an instruction librarian at Northwest College in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And today I want to talk to you about why you might want to consider doing a student survey, what kinds of questions you might want to include depending on your goals and focus, and how you could harness those results for impact. We did a survey because we were part of the newly created Open Education Steering Committee. We were mainly focused on finding ways to engage with students around the topic of open education. We wanted to better understand student level of awareness when it came to OER and their experience and the impact of textbook costs on their academic and personal choices. We already had buy-in from our institution because one of Northwest's goals is to have at least 80% zero textbook cost courses by 2030, so we didn't have to focus on that so much. We also knew that we wanted to use the results to prioritize where to focus our work and for future advocacy. When we developed the survey, we spoke to several different groups. I would recommend speaking to your Students Association. They're going to be most in tune with student perspectives and concerns. If you haven't been talking to them about open education at this point, it's a great way to open the conversation and you get their buy-in right from the beginning. And then they can help with distribution and generate ideas for future advocacy efforts and potentially lead advocacy in the future. You might want to speak with existing OER experts at your institution or experts and people who have done a similar survey at other comparable institutions to get insights into how to make your survey effective, how to get feedback, and what to do with your results. You might also want to speak with existing OER champions. So if you know of instructors that are already incorporating OER into their courses and might be interested in helping with distribution, or if you're able to kind of map out prospective advocates at the leadership level, that can give you insights into the types of primary concerns that you could, that at the leadership level, and that might help you kind of tailor your questions specifically to their concerns. Like I said, we didn't need to get institutional buy-in. We already had that, but if your institution isn't particularly focused on OER at this point, you might want to look at what its existing priorities are. So what are its goals? Are they interested in enhancing student experience, addressing affordability, increasing enrollment or retention, helping with student mental health and well-being? All those things can connect with open education. One of the major things we focused on in our survey was the academic impact of textbook costs. So are students choosing to buy all the required textbooks? If they don't, how does that impact their ability to learn the content of the course? And how does that impact their achievement in the course? How does it impact their course and program choices? And then how does it influence their learning capacity when they're taking on additional financial stress? Here are some example questions. So how many required textbooks have you purchased for your classes? Why did you decide not to purchase textbooks? It was because they're too expensive. That easily leads into conversation about transitioning to OER. If they say that they didn't think they were important, that's also useful because we often hear that faculty want to stick with traditionally published textbooks because they believe they're high quality or that they expect resistance from students. But if students are already not using the textbooks they're using in their course because they think they're unnecessary or they're irrelevant or they're not high quality, then that opens up the conversation to considering alternatives. We asked whether not owning the textbook, they thought it had impacted their grades, how much of an impact textbook costs had on their decisions about which courses and programs to take. And then we included a text response, and I would really recommend including something like this in your own survey. But we asked them to describe the impact textbook costs had on their educational experience. This will get you, the rest of it, the questions with preset answer options is going to give you those quantitative results that are really useful for demonstrating kind of the scale of impact, trends, and but these text responses will give you the stories, and the stories tend to be the most powerful in terms of really articulating the impact that students are feeling from textbook costs. We also asked about openness to OER, so student awareness of OER, their interest or preference for zero textbook cost courses. And then some people looked into whether, kind of projecting potential future accessibility issues related to OER and understanding what the barriers might be in terms of student adoption. We didn't focus on that part, but I will include a few questions that I've noticed in other surveys. So, like I said, we focused on familiarity with OER, whether people had heard of them or used them, how much more likely they were to enroll in a course that had zero textbook costs. And then what we didn't include was, questions about format, access to high-speed internet and personal internet-capable devices. And then students, we didn't ask students about whether, we didn't delve further into whether, what students thought about open textbooks if they had used them in a class. We just wanted to keep our survey reasonably manageable and short, but still get enough information that would be useful to us. But, it depends on your focus. I'm calling this life impact, although obviously your academic life is part of your life. But I mean things that, like choices outside of academia. So, how did it impact their purchasing decisions, quality of life, their current and future financial burden? How did it influence their school work life balance? We heard from students that the financial pressure of textbook costs caused them to take on more shifts, which reduced the amount of time they had to commit to school and studying. And then overall, how does it impact their mental health and well-being? Here are some example questions. So how much do they usually spend? Whether they could afford a textbook if they had to buy one, and how many they could afford. And then if they didn't have to purchase a textbook, what would they spend their money on instead? These were really enlightening responses that we got in the past 2 years we run this survey, where far and away, the most common response we got was that people would spend their money on basic necessities. What we heard was that students were paying for the basics: food, rent, housing, gas. We also included demographic questions. So I would really encourage you to include something like this, where there's a program level question. You can drill down into the responses that are specific to individual programs and then use those hyper tailored results when you approach programs about transitioning to open education. We also included a question about international or domestic student status, because we have a high proportion of international students, and we wanted to know if they were encountering the same issues or if their experience was different or similar to domestic students. You might also want to include a question about part-time or full-time status, and then what level of study the respondent is in. So with the expectation that students in an undergraduate degree program, particularly in the early years, are going to be more likely to be purchasing textbooks compared to maybe a graduate student. In terms of what to do with those results, there are a lot of options, but I would say it's most important to make sure that you are sharing what you heard, the major takeaways, and your future plan for action with the students. They're the ones that took the time to share their feedback, to lend their insights, and you want to make sure that they know you heard them. You also want to make sure you're sharing the results with the groups you connected with earlier. Share it with the Students Association. They are a powerhouse of ideas, and they are students themselves usually, and they're connected closely with student concerns. So they're going to be a great way to kind of figure out how to use those results. The results themselves you can use to better understand how to prioritize your work. For example, if you're seeing a lot of students in nursing talking about kind of exorbitant textbook costs and massive impact on their well-being and their ability to complete course content and achieve, a good grade in their course, then maybe that's where you focus your efforts at first. And the way that you package these results is going to depend on the audience and the level of depth of detail they need. So, an infographic with just the, punchiest, most important major takeaways might be good enough to share with students. The super detailed view that digs into all the nuances might be what you share at the leadership level. And then, like I said, the program specific information is what you share at the program level. I would also encourage you to be strategic in terms of when you share results and how you share them. We have a program review cycle that happens at the end of the winter term. So approaching the programs at that point with, maybe some OER options in hand, with having mapped out some of the supports that exist, but kind of positioning it at a point that they are making choices about changes to the course and course materials, and giving them enough that lead time so that way they can look at options and implement change in time for the fall term is going to be a lot more effective in terms of seeing action than approaching them in the middle of fall term when everyone's just running around trying to get everything done. And there's not really an opportunity at that point to make changes to the existing course materials. That's all I have for you today. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. I hope this has given you a bit more insight into why you might want to consider a student survey and the types of considerations that might play into your survey development, and then how you use the results that you get. Thank you.